I'm now fully convinced Star Trek 4 needs to happen, but only with a major change. I'm still waiting for J.J. Abrams' Star Trek 4 to happen to find out what's been happening in the Kelvin timeline since the end of 2016 Star Trek Beyond. And although I've always wanted a fourth movie from the franchise's softly rebooted reality, there's been a real-world development that has made me even more certain it should happen. Although 2009 Star Trek and the two following movies were already packed with star power, the years that have passed since the trilogy's end have resulted in them all becoming even more established actors. So Star Trek 4 would be especially high profile. The acting talent on show in Abrams' Star Trek movies was never in doubt. I'd long been a Chris Pine fan before his 2009 franchise debut and his interpretation of James T. Kirk was equally respectful of Shatner's efforts as it was true to Pine's own choices. Zachary Quinto's version of Spock also boasted similar qualities. Zoe Saldana was another star who shone immediately in Star Trek, replacing Nichelle Nichols as LT Nyota Uhura. Also appearing in Avatar that same year, 2009, was enormous for Saldana, but 2025 is arguably even bigger thanks to her first Oscar win. Saldana was presented with the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress due to her performance as Rita Mora Castro in 2024's Emilia Perez. Saldana was presented with the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress due to her performance as Rita Mora Castro in 2024's Emilia Perez. Although Saldana isn't the first Star Trek actor to win an Oscar, it puts her in an exclusive group. One of the most recent examples is Michelle Yeoh earning the Best Actress award at the 2023 Oscars for 2022's Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. This achievement arguably went some way to Yeoh going on to lead the cast of Star Trek, Section 31. So, Star Trek 4 should be Saldana's post-Oscar outing within the franchise. The Kelvin Timeline's movies replicate Star Trek, the original series' ensemble cast approach, although more focus is put on certain characters more than others. Pine's Kirk is one of the biggest stars of the trilogy, but Quinto's Spock and Carl Urban's Dr. McCoy also receive huge amounts of attention. Zoe Saldana does get a good amount of time on screen as Uhura, but nowhere near as much as other members of the Enterprise crew. So now armed with an Oscar win, Saldana has to be placed front and center with the other prominent characters in Star Trek 4. Uhura had some very important episodes in Star Trek, the original series, and Celia Rose Gooding's younger version of the character in Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, is similarly instrumental to how the story is told. So it wouldn't be anything new to give Kelvin Uhura a bigger platform than she has already enjoyed in the previous 3 films. Plus, delving further into the version of the character in the Abrams movies also keeps things interesting while also acknowledging Saldana's Oscar win and allowing her to further display the talent that earned her the Academy Award. News on another Kelvin timeline movie set after Star Trek Beyond has been fluid and hard to parse for years now. Although there is a clear desire from those involved with the original trilogy to continue the story, it remains unclear whether Paramount has officially greenlit the project. However, other sources state Star Trek 4 is still on the cards and that it's just stuck in production now. The movie has had several writers and directors attached, but none have seemingly been a fit for what is being labeled by some as the series' final chapter. It's been almost a decade since the crew of the USS Enterprise last graced the big screen in Star Trek Beyond. Despite its respectable critical reception and a loyal fanbase, the franchise stalled, caught in a gravitational tug-of-war between studio hesitation, actor availability, and the challenge of living up to the legacy of both Gene Roddenberry's utopian vision and J.J. Abrams' modern cinematic flair. But after all this time, and after revisiting what made the Kelvin Timeline trilogy such a bold reinvention, I'm now fully convinced Star Trek 4 needs to happen. But not just any Star Trek 4. Not one that tries to check off every nostalgia box or retreads tired galactic conflicts. If the Enterprise is to set sail once more, it needs a major course correction, a reinvention not of the cast or the visuals, but of the story's soul. The Kelvin cast still works, but needs new fuel. Let's start with the obvious. The Kelvin cast is still phenomenal. Chris Pine's Captain Kirk strikes the delicate balance between brash charisma and reluctant growth. Zachary Quinto's Spock has always honored Leonard Nimoy's legacy without ever feeling like an imitation. Zoe Saldana's Uhura, Carl Urban's McCoy, Simon Pegg's Scotty, they all clicked. The chemistry was real, and their portrayals brought new life to characters that could have easily felt like cosplay performances in lesser hands. But even the best crew needs a meaningful mission. Star Trek Beyond was fun, but it felt like a safe episode of The Next Generation with a $185 million budget. We've now seen 3 films where the core idea has been Kirk learns to be a better leader. That arc is complete. We need a new direction, one that finally asks the big, philosophical questions that made Star Trek iconic in the first place. The change, embrace Star Trek's intellectual heart. The major change I'm proposing is deceptively simple. Make Star Trek IV about ideas again. Not just action. Not just time travel gimmicks or resurrected villains. Give us a story that taps into modern fears, AI ethics, climate survival, identity, surveillance, and filter them through the lens of futuristic exploration. Remember when the motion picture tried to wrestle with the meaning of sentience and evolution? Or when The Undiscovered Country reflected the political uncertainty of the Cold War's end? Star Trek's greatest strength isn't its phasers or warp drives, it's its ability to reflect us as we are and as we could be. Imagine Star Trek IV centered around first contact with a post-singularity civilization, beings who have transcended biological form and now view organic life the way we view pre-electric societies. What would Kirk do when diplomacy isn't even comprehensible in human terms? How would Spock respond to logic that no longer recognizes emotion as a flaw, but as the final missing ingredient in achieving a unified consciousness? The Enterprise crew would be forced to confront not just a powerful external force, but their own limitations, not as individuals, but as a species. That's the kind of philosophical and narrative boldness Star Trek was made for. Bring in a visionary director, not just a blockbuster name. Here's another part of the change. Bring in someone who understands character-driven storytelling and speculative thought. Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, Dune is the obvious dream pick, but someone like Alex Garland Ex Machina Annihilation could thread the needle between cerebral and cinematic. Even Greta Gerwig, if given the right co-writer, could inject a fresh emotional depth that Star Trek has sometimes lacked. This doesn't mean the film should lack action, space battles, and tension are part of the fun. But the explosions should never be louder than the ideas. The Kelvin trilogy proved you can make Trek cool again. Now it's time to prove that cool can also be smart. In memory and in legacy, there's also a bittersweet reason Star Trek IV needs to happen. Anton Yelchin's Chekhov. The franchise lost a shining talent far too soon, and while recasting would feel wrong, honoring Chekhov's legacy within the story could be incredibly meaningful. A new navigator, mentored in memory of Chekhov, could bring an emotional grounding that would connect both fans and cast alike. Final thought. The final frontier still matters. We live in a world that often feels like it's losing hope. Climate anxiety, technological overreach, polarized societies, it's easy to feel like the future is something to fear. But Star Trek was always about possibility. About imagining a universe where humanity didn't just survive, it thrived by being better. That's why Star Trek IV needs to happen. But only if it's willing to boldly go beyond